Pecha Kucha 220, Drawing the Heads and Hands by Andrew Loomis. So a couple of years ago, I got this book off of Amazon. It was recommended because Andrew Loomis is one of those names that comes up when you hear people talk about methodology, how they learned, who taught the people they know. Drawing the Heads and Hands is specifically, surprise, surprise, about drawing the heads and hands. Written sometime in the 1940s to help people break into the American illustration and advertising industry. It's still broadly applicable to anyone with any interest in learning how to improve the quality of their illustrative work specific to heads and hands. So he starts the book by talking about his methodology, which is the idea of you start with a ball, you segment it. This represents the cranium, you add a jaw, and as long as you understand what you're doing from this early stage, creating a skull, you then plug in all of the things like eyes, noses, mouths, and you can vary the various elements to create different likenesses. He does also talk about, dividing the face into planes. While it's an overly angular approach isn't liable to be seen in a photograph, it helps differentiate people in illustrations from photographs, adding style and therefore adding value. He's talking as a man who sells his work for a living. The meat and potatoes of the book is the proportions that he explains per face type, per age range, as the building block you use to make sure everything where it's supposed to be. He does discuss musculature in passing, because facial expressions are always going to be more believable if you understand what the face does fundamentally. So if you're screwing up how a smile looks, you can figure out where it's gone wrong, because there's a lot of ways to apply surface value to these things, but they don't quite click. The eye knows. He does spend a little bit of time breaking down individual facial features and how they should operate within the skull, mechanically and as someone trying to depict them. Towards the start of the book, he also kind of runs you through each of the stages, so you can finally end up with a fully rendered, marketable illustration. He brushes a lot of things without really going into depth with too much outside of the actual proportions. After talking about full-grown men, he moves on to full-grown women, differentiating their proportions from what's already been established. The idea is that as you're going through this book, you take what he is teaching, you practice it, you learn it, you memorize it, and then you're varying that to get all the variations of women and age ranges going forward. He is taking photographic reference available to him, rendering these using the techniques he's provided, and that also gives you some form of reference to use. As you can see from the hairstyles, this is clearly from a time gone by. He briefly, from time to time in the book, talks about people of different age ranges. The elderly are the only age range that don't have a specific chapter, so they kind of get lumped in other places. Children have maybe half of the book, ranging from the really young children, babies, from born till like 2, and then he kind of moves up. Babies have very strange proportions, and I learned a lot about how one goes about drawing kids, because I don't, and I probably never will, but knowledge is a valuable thing. Making children look, plump and, capturing the essence of what makes everyone like babies and want to protect them and raise them, even though they're nothing but shitting machines at first. I think his renderings do a good job of encapsulating what it is you'd be wanting to go for with that, and it would enable you to follow his advice to do your versions. He does recommend that selling illustrations of young children to their families could be a profitable means of supplementing your income, but if that's still applicable almost a century after he said it, who can say? So at this point, he's moved on to renders of children who are about ready to enter school. He's working in an industry that is predominantly selling things to the parents of these children, so it's very important that one figures out how to get accurate representation of smiling children specifically, of pretty much all age ranges. If one expects to be successful in the medium he's been successful in. Again, that's not directly applicable to where we are now, but his breakdown of the age ranges and how those faces are constructed, the human skull hasn't really changed much in, if not centuries, then thousands of years, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And he never specifies a particular metric to use when it comes to proportions. It's more about the eyes should be equidistant across the head, and then the nose should be the base of the nose should be a certain distance from the eyes, etc., etc. When he talks about teenagers, since they're basically grown-ups, but a little bit younger, a little bit further of the face, it's more about style and mood, body language, which is always important when one is rendering any model, that they actually have some form of personality for the viewer to identify with. And right at the back, he does discuss hands, the structural underpinning of how the hand works, some interesting ways on how to block them up. And all of this, if you have a mirror, you have two hands and you have a head. You have excellent reference material available to you. It is worth pointing out. This book should be considered as tangential to your own studies, using photographic reference from anywhere and everywhere you can. You will be expected to do a lot of study to learn and really bank what he is explaining. I will be doing some studies myself pretty much all of next week to see what I think of what Loomis has to say on this matter. It's not the only Andrew Loomis book I have, but it's the first one I've decided to actually commit to going through and then actioning. So that's what I'm going to do. That brings us to the end of Pecha Kucha 220. I would recommend this book, but maybe not at the top of your list unless you specifically want something on the heads. Hands, it's just a chapter at the back, half a chapter even. It's not worth worrying about too much. You'd be better off just looking at your own hands, taking pictures, Googling stuff. But that brings us to the end of this week. I will see you next time.